Can I get some makeup for my bags? You need some makeup today.
Am I looking bad today?
We got a bit of the shine going on. I'm joking.
That's not what the comments on Twitter have said, mate.
Welcome. Thanks very much for coming to the local to listen to Marcus and myself talk about things that are crypto tangential, kind of pseudo relevant. But we hope we bring something a bit fresh and interesting. And there's been a lot that's been going on in the space, all sorts to talk about. And if you've caught the episodes with the technical deep dive stuff, keep looking for those because they're coming up quite regularly. We like talking about those.
That's my favourite episode, actually.
Yeah.
I think something you said to me today was, I don't have an opinion about macro.
I don't. So having spent years in banks
Watch him
and
now
with
do
traders,
35 minutes with an opinion about macro.
macro trading or just macro like crypto news is different, I think.
Okay.
So all the stuff we're going to talk about, which I find very interesting, I probably should do the next step, which is possibly the harder one, which is then formulate a trading thesis off the back of it, which is the discretionary piece.
And which you don't like doing. So before we started, we were talking about we don't like discretionary trading.
I don't like discretionary trading. Yeah, I think probably because I'm not skilled at it, which means I haven't spent too much time trying to get better at it. Whereas you seem to have a personal trading account which goes up only, right?
I wouldn't say it's up only.
I think that's what you said.
I don't think I used the word up only. I think I said my. This is my betting account, though,
Yeah.
not my. I'm very, very actually very, very boring. And my personal account, I just have loads
Gilts.
of ETFs and gilts. I like to be shielded from the capital gains.
Okay, yes, that's fair.
But yeah, no, I have a CFD
Betting account.
yeah, spread betting account, which is obviously tax free as well.
Yeah, is this something that's known at home? Can this be going out publicly? Our partners don't listen to this anyway, do they?
Yeah.
No.
My wife's not listening to this.
Okay.
And if she is, I'm up. So
just under inflation.
Yeah. What? Shh, we don't talk about it. We never talk about inflation.
There isn't any
adjusted
inflation.
returns.
Yeah.
When I was a lad, we used to do our Sharpe ratios without
inflation.
without a risk-free
times.
rate.
Yeah. What risk-free rate? Isn't it
It's
zero?
zero, basically.
They're the rates traders over there. Oh yeah, they're still asleep. Yeah. So lots to talk about in this episode. We can kick off in a number of directions. But for me,
talk about Binance.
Yeah, let's talk about Binance or Binance and the SEC because I think there's a lot of stuff that's interesting that's going on in the regulatory environment in the US. Obviously, we had a lot of hope post-election that the incoming administration would be a lot more friendly for
that seems to be bearing some fruit.
crypto. It does, yeah. So the big news or the headline news initially was that charges against Binance as opposed to CZ. Binance were.
Do you say
dropped.
CZ?
CZ.
I say CZ.
Really?
Yeah.
CZ.
But is it?
But he's known as CZ.
Yeah, but the rapper's JZ, right?
So anyway, so the SEC have quietly dropped or loudly dropped all of the charges against Binance that were outstanding, which were a litany of things.
So CZ's a martyr.
So ZZ was the guy that sort of fell on the sword, I think, and then Coinbase obviously pushed back very hard against the previous chair of the SEC and the charges that they were being faced with, which eventually have gone away. And now we see kind of the logical next conclusion, which is the Binance ones have to go away as well, which is what's happened.
But this is so. What's the? Is it the same rationale that they've done for Coinbase, which is this is just a regime change and therefore it was all jumped up. There was no substance to it. It was Gary Gensler's personal vendetta, and
I think what sits underneath
or
it.
have they paid a fine? Or
No,
there were some fines paid.
Well, I mean, the big headline ones were in relation to CZ, and the charges that he faced and then did prison time for.
Oh, yeah,
right.
What was it helping the Iranians?
I couldn't possibly comment.
But
I think what it signals more importantly, and it comes on to some of the other stuff that has come out from the SEC like very recently, is they want to approach regulation in a different way. And so I think we've spoken about it before. The narrative previously was regulation by enforcement. So token protocols would be raided by the SEC and exchanges would be raided by the SEC, and then it was like, okay, well, we're going to put some enforcement on you and work out which regulations you might have broken after we've done all the
guilty until proven innocent.
Very much so. Yeah, and it comes back to that idea that maybe there was a large personality flaw that was driving a lot of this.
Well, I mean, I always knew the tale. He basically was involved in Algorand, and then
didn't make his
I don't know
billions.
and then so basically it was pissed off about it.
And so I think it's a healthy thing for the regulatory environment globally, because everyone, despite other jurisdictions be way more advanced, everyone looks to the US because of the size of capital base that it has there in general, and the moves to remove the charges are good for Binance, good for exchanges in general, because
it's just for clarity in general, right? I mean, and particularly for, what was the comment about from DeFi and for token projects,
right? So and this is the thing that I think is now interesting. So that happened, and then Paul Atkins, the chair of the SEC, has recently done a speech where he's talking about DeFi being
DeFi
aligned.
stands for liberty
And freedom, and the SEC being all for this sort of stuff, which is a sea change of narrative from that institution. And I think particularly for builders of token projects and protocols that have kind of kept themselves away from being in the US.
Because you don't want to. You, like, the last thing you want to do is, like, you've got a cool idea, you want to build it, you want to build a token, you want to build a project, you want to build a community, and the last thing you want to do is fall foul of the SEC for building some unlicensed
for their
security or
regulatory
something.
overreach. That was kind of like,
which has been forcing people into sunnier.
So
climbs.
We've seen this over the last
sunnier
4 or 5
regulatory climbs.
years.
Yeah.
Other regulatory regimes have moved ahead, and they've benefited and have got nascent crypto ecosystems growing up around them. We talked about the sunny Caribbean islands being, where a lot of entities end up domiciled in the space for that reason. They inherit legal structures and regimes from other countries and have enacted them well, and then they've gone, okay, well, if we want this ecosystem to be part of our future going forward, let's put some sensible regulation in place, which they've done. And then we know that there are other regions in the world, like Middle East, Singapore, Hong Kong, that have tried to do the same.
Regulations?
Or at least they've been very foot forward. And so with that environment and that range of option on the table, why would you risk stepping on the toes of what seems to be a very rapacious regulator in the US?
They're going to put you in the slammer for 25 years in a supermax.
And so when Atkins comes out and says that about DeFi in general,
which I think is better for the ecosystem, because of course it's just a lot, having capital onshore. If you're a builder and raising capital, it's always going to be easy to raise onshore.
And we know that, from our own personal experience, raising in the US is the place to raise. They've got whole ecosystems around how that happens, and it's a lot more active than certainly in Europe, possibly other areas of the world as well. And so I think for DeFi, the fact that, yes, they've dropped the Binance stuff, that seemed very institutional. It's quite specific.
It's like a two-pronged attack. We're going to go a bit easier on the institutions now, and also we're going to endorse DeFi, which is kind of a little bit easier on the builders.
And so I think this is that sort of delayed effect of, this was the Trump administration coming in. They put what seems to be...
I didn't think you were going to mention his name today.
I'm not... We're not talking about
just
that
the administration.
Just the administration. That sounds really sinister, though.
Doesn't it? It's a bit 1984, isn't it?
I wasn't going to mention his name either. You've seen all the really good Elon memes of him sort of leading the stormtroopers out and stuff.
No,
okay.
Don't look at memes.
Okay. That's not true.
I'm head down in the code. I'm just in the ones and zeros.
Ones and zeros, like reading the Matrix as it comes down, just plugged in.
I think that's what my wife thinks it looks like when I'm like, no, this is actually just me fighting the compiler.
What's the line? My mum thinks I work at Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think my mum probably does.
Yeah. Great. So I think regulatory, no clarity yet, but just a big signal that it's not going to be by enforcement. So come and build. We'll consult possibly. We'll be open. It's aligned with US values of freedom and liberty, right?
Well, the current regime's US values of freedom.
I think it's embedded. I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, you and I joust on this a lot. I think this is something that everyone pseudo kind of wants, because there are enough interests aligned to make it.
But we could just small touch on the UK system then, because we have to talk about America. But small win as well for us
with the ETNs, ETPs,
but with the alignment with the European regs.
Yeah, so
it's not
sea change, but it's a step in the right direction for sure. Not going to suddenly mean that all the builders that are in Dubai or Hong Kong will come back.
I think the ship has sailed for the UK in that. I mean, we can talk about.
There's all sorts of other headwinds about building in the UK that I think are probably even beyond the FCA / regulator, right?
I think they weren't.
Okay.
I think they weren't. I think if you could have come out in 2019, 2019, and had a really, really forward-thinking approach, and there was signals that they might have, but with anything in the UK, it's just fall into the hands of fast stream civil service people who just have never had a real job, don't know what they're doing.
No comment. You're a lot closer to that world than I am, so I'm not going to say anything. I mean, we're obviously building in the UK, and there are things that are good about doing that in the UK. The talent pool is
it's good.
Decent.
Yeah.
And there are R&D schemes that help with that sort of stuff, which is great. But the regulatory side for crypto businesses has not been clear, and I don't think the ETP ETN thing helps.
is not clarity. It's a step in the right direction, right. But it's a bit like you're sitting in the relegation zone and you need 20 points to get out of it, and you've just got
like Leeds
a home
all the time.
Yeah. No, Leeds are actually top of the championship, actually going up as champions. And you've just got a home draw against Crystal Palace on a Tuesday night, and you go, it's better than losing.
Better than losing. Yeah. And it brings me up to the person that I'm competing with, in the league, which is Europe, who've allowed the trading of these for a long time. I don't think. I mean, it's
just a harmonisation of regulation, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be clear, the FCA wasn't like the SEC in terms of trying to regulate through enforcement anyway.
Well, they've got no money or any power.
But they've been super consultative with the crypto industry in general. Like they put out papers. There's one that came out, consultation paper. I think they are within the constraints of budget and political ecosystem. They're doing a decent job with respect to consultancy side of crypto regulation. They just
coming up with completely the wrong rules.
They haven't gone forward and gone, this is the framework, come and build here, everything's clear, you're not going to go to jail. Whereas I think the promise of what Atkins has come out has gone, we don't have the framework yet, but you're not going to go to jail.
Okay.
And so come here because all the capital's here, and there's a decent amount of talent as well. So I mean, big news, both in terms of the SEC, the way that they're going to approach DeFi, liberty, freedom, and then sort of a little minnow bark from the FCA in terms of
what about the other obviously the other big news is the Circle IPO, right?
Yeah, the Circle IPO is I think
you were champing at the bit to tell me about this. I am champing
because there's so much that it touches on, given the characters involved, both in terms of institutional characters and individuals, the potential for this to be how do you describe it in films where you have the villain hero narrative arc? And you have the narrative arc of like Tether and Circle now, which could go in so many interesting ways. Maybe not good for us as a business.
Who's the villain in that one?
What, in Tether?
Well, I mean, obviously,
in the setup now.
It's clearly Tether, right?
Yeah. There's this
shady Hong Kong,
unregulated,
we don't know where,
private company that's become one of the biggest holders of treasuries in the world, highest revenue per employee.
Was it 68 million per employee?
I mean, daft numbers. And so, a de facto creator of on-chain money for a long time, which has all sorts of ramifications.
Maybe I'm just too trad, but like you could talk about this move, putting Circle and USDC on the path to unseating Tether's dominance.
I think that's the play,
I just think Tether is so embedded in the derivatives ecosystem. Like, how much perpetual open interest exists denominated in Tether that you would have to unwind to be denominated? I mean, we know we trade both Tether quoted perps and USDC quoted perps, right? Circle quoted perps. And I mean, the volumes are just an order of magnitude different.
They are, but imagine if USDC becomes the quote currency on all US equity exchanges, or all CME products, or all like dollar.
I mean, I think that's a bit of a stretch. I don't think. You think it's going to come all the way?
I mean, it's effectively what Coinbase is right now. All the spot is USD.
Well, they guarantee 1-to-1, don't they? Right. They call it USD, but it's actually USDC. You get a 1-to-1.
Right. So I think that's why, despite the embedded nature of USDT, which is very prevalent, it's also it doesn't have that regulatory stamp of approval.
No, I agree.
or
I agree with
the-
that. But I mean, is that enough? I mean, question: is that enough to unseat it?
No, I
Because
just think it
people have
means that
been
you have
very-
this. You have this multi-episode narrative arc that
Yeah,
is going
right,
to
okay,
continue
yeah.
over like
Multipolar world.
Yeah. No, it's just going to be like Star Wars, but with stablecoins. It's just going to go on, and then we'll have prequels, and it will be amazing to see how this unfolds. Right? I mean, the boring thing would be if the Tether guys just come out and go, "Yeah, here's all our audited financials. Yeah, we're fine.
We were never lying, actually.
And none of it ever went to Korea, and
Yeah.
like it was never involved with it. Yeah, and then that would be boring.
Right,
Whereas
okay.
this is just from a interested participant, it might be existential for our business, but
I mean, we like volatility,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, a tether. So, because the way I see it is like to unseat tether,
yeah,
you can get all the regulatory approval and you can get all the like thumbs up from institutions, but probably to unseat it, you need the DPEG, right? You need there to be some seismic. Because regulations and stuff are nice and institutions do, but otherwise, what's the push for exchanges to have a huge overhaul about where they're quoting all of their perps, right? And where all the volumes, and it's got to be some sort of DPEG event, which tether DPEGing is, it's the end of the world as we know it.
it's the end of the crypto world.
Yeah. So what is that like a future where you end up with a tether DPEG?
Possible.
And then Circle comes and picks up the pieces. Or
How do you want the story to end?
I don't know. I don't have an opinion either. I don't have a macro opinion, but
I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen that I think now Circle are so embedded in the incredibly much larger still TradFi
that's true. Yeah.
ecosystem could mean that Tether gets replaced.
You've got some strong opinion about them being the new Fed or something, right?
I just think the meta is interesting in that I'm so old that I've seen this change of what I
We were called
perceive
florins back in the day, weren't they?
abacuses and florins, ducats. Are they called ducats?
I have no idea, mate. I'm a digital native.
You wish. The financialization of everything is something that I feel has happened in my lifetime. Probably hasn't, but it feels that everything is financialized now. And so you
can buy burritos on payment plans, right?
Right.
It's
from Klarna exists everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just like this extraction of value from people who should know better,
well,
but haven't been educated. Actually, that's something we should talk about. Is the one financial lesson you should give to everyone if you had the choice. But the
compound interest.
Yeah, well, no, it's the value of money, or the discounted value of money. But this financialization, whether it's just a me thing or it has actually happened, I think the fact that you have what is effectively a printer of money. Which is what Circle do. You give them money and then they print this digital version of money, one for one, which is nice.
How is that any different to a bank?
Right, we can get onto that.
Like I said, go on. I've jumped the gun.
But no, it's fine because there's so many things we can talk about with respect to Circle. But they got this creator of money that have then gone to list on an exchange, which is normally the peak of a company's sort of evolution.
IPO
the IPO is like
right?
this hallowed end goal. And so you've got this company which makes money, like then going and listing and spreading its shares across the world, across everyone. So everyone can now everyone can now own a piece of a thing that makes money, which is like
you don't mean makes money, you mean prints money.
Which is this weird. It's just this in my head. It's this weird end game of financialization.
The Fed privately owned as well.
All the Feds are privately owned, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're still the
Bank of England is, but I thought the US Fed came out of a conglomerate of privately owned banks. So do you end up with a competitor? Do you end up with a competitor Fed, which is a conglomerate of privately owned stablecoin issuers?
Yes, I think.
In the end, you need a strong president to get a grip of them, and it was the depression and all that. Right?
And the state level Feds as well.
Basically, they kind of I'm well outside of my wheelhouse, but fuck it. I think what happened was you had these basically private banks that, again, were money issuers, right? Because that's what banks ultimately are, right? Yep. They convert cash into ledger.
Yep.
And there was, I think, the Great Depression or a financial crash, and basically, the federal government had to get a grip of it and say, can you guys step in and lend us the money, and we're going to create the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve was funded by this conglomerate of these private banks. JP Morgan was involved.
Right, so very different from the way the Bank of England
works.
Very
different.
Because ultimately it comes back to who has a monopoly on force.
Yeah.
Right. So in our country, it was the kings and his army, and they're minting money to pay people.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I think that there are parallels to what might happen in terms of competition to Circle going forward from the existing banks.
So what I'm going to say, like, what's their moat other than the brand?
Yeah, good question. Being a lot further ahead.
Yeah. But is that a moat?
And their potential competitors not.
If that was if incumbency was a moat, we'd never see any innovation, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, other than being first and going, is the moat the fact that the regulatory drawbridge comes up behind them, and you go, actually now you're the only person who can do this for stablecoins? And
so I think this is when you get into what the actual realities are, the incentives and the structures behind this particular business, like as in Circle, and in terms of who its early backers were, who it's still got large equity holdership from.
It's all Coinbase, right?
Coinbase, Fidelity, Bloomberg's, Arm. So this is very much a TradFi vehicle for expressing interest in stablecoins and stuff. So it's got that US establishment backing, and so there's all sorts of world in which they do draw up the regulatory drawbridge behind everyone else.
Because it kind of goes to an interesting point about what we discussed in one of the other episodes about the Genius Act.
Yeah,
and the Genius Act explicitly excludes the tech firms.
I love that.
Yeah, explicitly excludes the tech firm from creating their own stablecoins.
But not a cabal of banks.
Yeah, well, exactly. So that's the thing, isn't it? It's actually like, because what would stop, and I'm sure it's been explored by Meta and Google and whatnot, like stop them creating a stablecoin competitor?
Well, the Genius Act.
Yeah,
right?
well, the Genius Act is doing it. So I think is that it? If Circle won because they've drawn up the regulatory drawbridge and gone, well, anyone who could be a real competitor to us, anyone who's got really large distribution and loads of users, big network. Obviously, we've got no business model because all we do is take dollars in, put them in trade. It's basically a one-sided basis trade, right? Like it's just a treasury basis trade.
Yeah,
but without any cost, which is nice business. But like, no one else to stop anybody else doing it.
I mean, there is cost, right? There's we haven't even touched on Coinbase's involvement. There's custody element that needs to be handled correctly.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I was being very broad brush stroke when I said there's no cost,
but it's not like they've got factories and.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the basis trade, anyone can put a basis trade. It's the biggest trade in the world, right? $1.5 trillion in the US Treasury basis trade at the moment. I think
incredible.
It's big lever on it from some of the big boys as well.
Yeah,
they're kind of just doing that. So if you've got a network. And you can distribute, and you've got an app and Rails, because Stripe can do the Rails and all this shit. What's to stop you just issuing USD?
Right, and so this is why we've seen in
USD
the last.
Tim.
We've seen. Yeah, that works.
Yeah.
Us Tim.
Yeah,
but we've seen a lot of new stablecoins come to the fore in the last year.
There's loads
for
of
that
USD
reason.
one, from. We're not going to mention name, USD1 from him and stuff. So I'm interested to see like if Circle win, or we have a very history never repeats but it echoes. But we end up with 10 stablecoin issuers that the Fed ultimately has to.
I think
the federal government ultimately has to bring under.
It's where sort of real politics comes into it. You have to look at how far advanced Circle and Coinbase are along or how closely they are paired now to Wall Street and the financial institutions that still control so much of the money flows and stuff. So yes, you can launch. You and I could launch a stablecoin this afternoon if we wanted to.
Yeah,
not a bad idea.
Not a bad idea actually. Do you know what we could do? We could put short the perp, long the spot,
and then actually pay some yield on it as well.
Oh yeah.
Can I mint the first one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If you what are we going to do? Pound or dollar? I don't have any dollars on me.
Yeah, no, I've got some pounds though.
Yeah. Maybe we could back them with something else. If I give you some Guinness, can you put that in, collateralize that, and give me some stablecoin?
Could be done
with a haircut.
Well, there's gonna have to be some carry, right? they don't exist.
They don't want for one.
They don't want for. Well, it's not a paper trade, is it? Because I've got to store them somewhere.
You seem to be storing them fine at the moment. Sorry, because I probably got distracted by my meta about Coinbase and the financialization and stuff. But there's stuff we can talk about in terms of the actual IPO itself, and where it's priced versus where it's trading now, which some people have gone
30 to
or over 100. Yeah. So
I saw $69 as a price, which I was like, nice.
Hasn't hit 420 yet.
Yeah, will do.
And so I think there's all sorts of things that could be going on here because on the face of it, Circle have sold some of their equity way too cheap. So there's a question there, were they misinformed by the bankers, or is there more going on here that if you peel back the layers, people will never know, but I find it interesting. So the fact that it had such a large pop and continues to rally draws a lot of attention and a lot of eyes. So is there a conversation that happens between Circle and its bankers where they go, look, we're going to we're going to price here.
It's classic shitcoin stuff, right? Isn't it?
So
right? We want to pump on day. We want to pump on day one, so let's price it here when we know it's valued here.
Right, but why would you do that as a company if you're actually trying to raise funds, or why would you be open to doing that unless you're going to be dripping secondaries into the market straight away? So is it just a genuine mispricing, or is it a sort of marketing ploy to...
I actually think IPO pricing is incredibly hard.
Yeah, of course.
I think it's just very...
Is it though, right? Because these guys have raised before several big raises. There was one in 21 for 440 million, right? So they've had price points on the setup, and if they are just the money in, deposit, earn interest, they know what revenues are potentially.
Well, every 25 basis point drop in US Treasury rates costs them 30 million revenue a year.
Right? Is that no? It must be more than that.
I think that's the number I heard.
Okay, so
am I off by a factor of 10?
I don't know.
But I thought it was 25 bips is about 30 million revenue. Yeah.
Okay, I mean it's huge numbers, but they're quite easy to model, making some assumptions about interest rates and stuff. So the pricing of the entity in terms of how much it's worth as
but you can model, you can model all of that, but then it's an IPO, right? So what you can't model is people's appetite for it, right? Yeah, because retail investors who want to get involved in that aren't looking at all the balance sheet and the flows and all the revenue. They just do it on a vibe, right?
Would you be, if you were one of OGs at Circle and you had a bunch of equity, would you be happy or upset with the pricing of the IPO, given that you would have taken some dilution in that process?
Yeah, I mean, you've taken, 3x more dilution than you could have done.
Right.
So... yeah, difficult to say. It depends how. If I was one of the really OGs, I'm probably quite happy.
Yes. That's fair.
You know what I mean? Well, I took a bit of extra dilution, he says, from his yacht. My yacht's only 120 feet long, not 130 feet long. I mean, it's difficult to say. I mean, this is so far into the realms of... it's so far outside of the hands of anyone controlling it. I have this theory, about complex systems.
Someone would have decided that number, the IPO listing.
Yeah, they're investment bankers, probably Goldman.
Yeah, but in consultation with the firm or the board.
Yeah,
of the firm,
right. But
right?
you know what it's like when these extremely complex decisions have to be made, and no one really knows the answer, and you can put a number on it, and the number seems sensible, and you really can't model demand. I can see how you could arrive at a mispricing quite easily
by 3 times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the world that you do misprice it by 3 times,
it's back down though. No,
you benefit from the pop and all the attention on.
Yeah, I mean it's like exactly. Yeah.
Okay, fair.
And if you're so high, on a personal level, if you're one of those decision makers, the numbers are so large that what's is there a real difference between you being worth 5 billion, 15
from
billion?
From a personal perspective, yeah.
I mean, is there really any? The numbers are so large and so meaningless when it comes to personal impact on you. Is your life difference between 5 billion? If you are worth 5 billion versus 15 billion, is there any material difference to your life?
I have no idea.
Exactly, there's not, right? I mean, you can't. It's more imaginable wealth than 99.999% of the planet.
Exactly.
So, if you're wrong by 3x, what does it matter?
The thing is the interesting about the IPO pricing, and I agree with everything you said, but I can't work out whether it was priced well or priced badly. On one hand, it looks clearly like it was priced badly.
For one man's meat is another man's poison and all that.
For Coinbase, it could be a weird blend of both, right? Yeah, they've given away equity at a level which is clearly not the clearing price for the equity, which is much, much higher.
But they'll probably still hold some stock anyway.
But there's another effect which is harder to put a value on, which is all the eyes on and all the new holders that have come in as a result of buying it. So,
and you don't know the nuance of what stock they still own, and there might be payouts based on multipliers.
There might be all sorts of derivatives.
There's all sorts of stuff going on. Yeah.
Okay.
You can financialise that.
Yeah. So that was interesting about Coinbase for sure. I think...
Is that Coinbase in every episode so far?
Sorry, I'm in circle. It's just a circle. I can't help it with Coinbase. But Coinbase are involved.
Yeah.
They're involved, right? So
when I think circle, I think Coinbase.
Why?
I don't know. I've got it's like brand association, right?
But why
when
is that, right?
When I think
Can I tell you?
Facebook, I think Meta sort
Can
of
I tell
thing.
you some of it?
Yeah, go on.
So we've seen this ramp up in Circle and the price from the IPO, whether it was priced correctly or not, to TBD. But we haven't seen as much a move on Coinbase, which is already IPO'd and obviously out there. Guess who gets 50% of the interest income from Circle?
Coinbase.
Yep. 50%.
50%.
Yep. 50%. So why is Coinbase not moving like dramatically up with this company?
If I had a background in statistical arbitrage,
Yeah,
correlation reversion,
there might be a discretionary trade.
there might
you
be a
could do.
discretionary trade.
Not my show.
I might be shorting Circle and longing Coinbase
Right.
there.
So I mean that's interesting. Full stop. They've been obviously very intertwined. They both funded I think something that was called Center, which was the original issue of
maybe it's because
USDC.
it's actually priced on the future value,
right?
Rather than and Coinbase's price is getting 50% of the interest of the present value, right? Whereas there's some maybe some time value there. Or something.
Either way, they are, as we both know. We maybe didn't. I intuitively realised that they were entwined. As it sounds like you did as well. But I didn't realise that they were 50% of the revenue from there. And they own
but
a
to be honest,
stake. They own a stake as well.
50% of the of the interest revenues is like what? 10% of the fees we paid last month to Coinbase.
Come on the show, Brian. So yeah, there's that like exposure that Coinbase have to Circle, and they must be very happy as a result of the revenues that they're getting. But they also own a chunk of equity from original investment as well, and they get to keep 100% of all the revenues for anything that's minted on Coinbase. Oh, and by the way, they also custody all of Circle as well.
Oh right,
so
that's cheap as well, isn't it? Yeah.
So they have the custody solution. So these two are very, very in bed with each other. It's the same company, right? Yeah. So and which again sort of speaks to the intertwined nature of those two, but how much further along they are than try and put this in, like have a look at Tether, the major big competitor. To
any of them like USD1, USDD, any of this shit, right?
But just think about them in terms of the traditional finance acceptance of those stable coins versus how far along both of these other companies are as flag bearers for.
I still don't think it's them up.
No, it's fair. What is the future for Circle? Because there are a lot of different routes that it could take from here.
Well, we've got different. I think they end up being a bank and a cabal of banks, and you end up thinking they'd be a prop shop.
I end up thinking there's a world's
biggest fixed income hedge fund. I think you said.
Yeah, because I think when you come back to incentives and structures that you have to put in place to manage the balance sheet that they have.
Well, I'm hoping somebody's hedging the interest rate risk.
Well, you'd hope they've hired someone with a skilled background in that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And when you hire someone with a skilled background in that sort of thing, they tend to have a view on where they believe interest rates are going.
For that size, right? For that kind of size. I mean, okay, the market's big, but for that kind of size, you're kind of getting into discretionary play, right?
You can see the conversation happening already. Like, you can just see a world in which when you've hired someone competent with skills to be able to manage the balance sheet and make sure that as interest rates get cut, the revenue of the firm isn't affected as much as it could be. Hedging with derivatives and other mechanisms. That person comes in and their job is to some extent initially to protect the revenue. Make sure we don't have a down quarter or a down year if interest rates come off. Okay, boss, I can do that. I've got the skills to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so they go off and do that, and they come back and they do it well. It's like, right, you've done well here. Okay, maybe you can have a bit more remit to take a bit of risk. Why don't you see if you can actually make a bit more money than the interest rates?
Yeah, why don't you collateralise some of these interest
rates?
Well,
I mean, you seem to know this space really well. And you seem
But isn't this just what banks did all the way up to 2007?
Right, and
until they had their balls chopped off.
Yeah, they were prop businesses.
Yeah, they were prop businesses,
huge
and then they had their balls chopped off in 2008.
But that bit doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, you've got Circle here sitting on all this balance sheet that are going to employ smart people who are going to have views to do this sort of thing, who are going to want to take risk to increase their personal compensation.
Of course, yeah.
And so it's suddenly the world's biggest.
Maybe we're both right. Maybe it's a bank and a prop hedge fund, and that's the same thing. And it's just
it's Lehman 2006.
exactly. That's maybe we're a bit earlier, 2002.
Okay, but yeah, I see that as the personal incentives are there.
I can buy that,
and the structural incentives are there. And then there's the other side, which I think you are completely right on as well. I don't think stablecoins can continue to exist without offering some yield back to the people that put the money in.
Well, we already know that's coming.
But whether the mechanism sits within Circle or whether it sits outside on some sort
like
of
a wallet
staking
or a
protocol. Yeah,
staking
exactly,
wallet?
right? So you get 1-for-1, which is great for Circle because they get to take it and not have to pay any yield. But then you take your USDC out and put it into something that gives you yield.
I don't see why Circle are incentivized to do that.
Right.
It's just giving away revenue.
Whereas the holder of the USDC wants some yield, and if the issuer of it is not going to give it,
Well, you can get it from lending protocols and stuff.
exactly.
Like that, so
yeah.
whether or not, I think the big boon for that is like that it's automatically just for holding it, right?
Yes.
Like in your wallet.
in your wallet.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
So
in
the
your
wallet providers,
your wallet provider or whoever
partner with the staking businesses.
Yeah, and the user just wants to see their USDC balance.
And your USDC gets looped through some sort of DeFi protocol that
who knows
gives you staking tokens that you then deposit again.
I think that's the UI issue, right? Though, isn't it? Like,
yes, it should just happen.
It should just happen.
Yeah.
People are like staking, and then I've got my AUSD, and it's my AUSD that's a rebase token, and then like I have to unstake
And I've
it,
just switched off because
exactly.
Yeah.
I think it just needs to happen in the wallet.
Yeah, which is what I mean.
It's what would happen in a bank account, right?
And I think as we as a business,
you get a payment every month, right?
We believe as the future of finance that sits on top of blockchain rails is where all this happens anyway.
Yeah.
And so you don't see any of this nonsense going on. It
The bank,
to quote our colleague, it just works.
It just works. TM.
Yeah, it just works.
Yeah, exactly. The bank handles it for you, right?
Yes.
You don't see it when when your £100 that you've got deposited in your savings account, and they pay you your £5 interest every month. You don't see the fact that £100 has actually been
lent out times
and bought gilts and
Yeah.
earned yield and that, right? It's just all obfuscated for you by some institution, really.
Yeah. So that's Circle in the future, or the wallet provider, or
It's all the same.
So a lot about Circle there, which I could carry on talking about for ages.
You noticed that we've actually gone and got another beer. That's how.
If anyone wants to DM me about Circle and the IPO and its intertwined nature with Coinbase and how
Maybe it's like, is this becoming a sleep podcast now?
Maybe, yeah. I'll just carry on talking and people can use it to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for listening. I think we'll call it a wrap there. It's a lot about Circle.
See you next time. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.